you may have heard the world premiere for Into the Arctic was at the Canadian Embassy in Washington, D.C. last January. And now, a year later to the month, it's in Canada. And we're so thrilled. I'm thrilled. I know my wife is thrilled as well. Just to help connect other people with this incredible part of our world. Before I get too carried away, I wanted to say I'm thrilled to be here, not just because it's Canada, but it's Vancouver. We drove up to Squamish yesterday. Almost didn't come back because I had my sketchbook and I said, I can just stay up here for a while. I've never painted up here before. There's so much to see. And so, but we made it back, had these responsibilities, and I want to say thank you to a few of the people here who have made Into the Arctic possible to share with you tonight. To Joost, Duncan, and the rest of the team at the Vancouver Maritime Museum, thank you so much for opening your doors, for the incredible warm embrace that you've given us to share my passion of the Arctic here. Thank you. To my wonderful wife Janet, our daughters Andy and Sydney there with the camera helping out. For those who don't know, our first expedition to the Canadian Arctic was a family affair. In 2006, we left our home in Caledon, just northwest of Toronto, and traveled to the Western Arctic, not to return for 2.5 months. Andy and Sydney were 7 and 11 at the time, and they're 19 and 22 now. So they've been there every step of the way, whether in the field or not, and it's just wonderful to have them be with me here today and to have be such an incredible moral support back home all the time. So thank you. My incredible tour director, David J. Wagner, who cannot be with us tonight, but has worked tirelessly behind the scenes for the last 3 or 4 years, developing a tour that has not only arrived here, but has so far traveled to, what is it now? We're up to 8 museums, I believe, in addition to the embassy, with more to come. And the tour, which is now expanded from an original 2-year time frame to 4 years. Without David's incredible work, the tour wouldn't be here. David also has, although he's based in Wisconsin, a fantastic Canadian pedigree. He actually toured the very first collection of the McMichael over in Ontario with a group of 7 to 11 museums across the United States back in the early 80s. And so his passion for Canadian art runs deep. He even toured a number of Emily Carr's works over the years. So to have him as our tour director, as a partner in this, has been wonderful. So thank you to David. And to my collectors, whose faith and support has made it possible for me to take that very first step up in the Arctic. I would have never been able to go to the Arctic had it not been for clients of ours who had an ear for me to share a story about how I'd come across the North and I want to go up there, and somehow they thought the idea that I proposed of buying paintings that didn't exist was actually good enough that 15 of them got on board. And but them doing so allowed me the seed to take that first step in the Arctic back in 2006. Of course, they got to pick first. And some of them are here tonight. So thank you guys so much for being part of making this a reality, other than just being a dream. And also, all these clients who are kind enough to loan their works, to leave their collections. Every painting that you will see either here or at the QET, except for the 15-footer, which is still available, belongs to someone who has been kind enough to loan it, and I'm greatly appreciative of that. Thank you to our wonderful tour supporters. Nunavut Tourism, massive region of the Arctic, has helped me and to share the Arctic through this tour. And of course, none other than Squamish, BC's very own One Ocean Expeditions, who, as you may or may not have heard, during my 4th Arctic expedition in particular, picked me up from the Northwest Passage on Devon Island, and I traveled with them for 17 days. That was after 7 weeks across the Arctic. So it was an incredible break, but it was also eye-opening, and it allowed me to go to places I would have never seen otherwise. I'm also thrilled to rejoin them this summer in the Arctic, along with my wife Janet, and if you act quickly, there just may be an opportunity still to join us all up there. And I have a special thank you, a very special thank you to the Inuit who I've traveled with over the years. It's been a privilege of mine to get to know the Arctic through their eyes, to have them show me some of the ways they live off the land, to sit next with Billy Arnicuk and catch Arctic char, just me and him out on the land with his dog, and others over the years, the 8 or 9 or 10 different individuals across the North that I've been able to travel with one-on-one in my quest to paint the North. It's been just fantastic and wonderful, and so it's a huge debt of gratitude I have for opening their culture to myself and being able to travel with them firsthand. So a quick overview. When I first stepped into the Arctic over a decade ago, it was a quest to find and paint the wildest places in Canada. I didn't realize at the time that I was also stepping into some of the wild places on our entire planet. This dawned upon me more and more as I started to travel the north and talk to other people who've traveled around the world. It truly is one of the greatest wilderness landscapes on the planet. And little did I know that I was also embarking not only on an inspirational journey, but an educational journey. One that I hope I can share through my art and my films. 4 expeditions range from a month to 2.5 months in length. And with a pack full of painting, filming, and camera gear, my camping gear, I traversed about 40,000 kilometers, 6 Arctic national parks, 16 Arctic communities, and a whole lot of places in between. I wanted to experience this land intimately. As part of my artistic process, I've always felt that unless I get to know a place, how can I possibly create any art that would have any kind of meaning or resonance or authenticity? And so that was the whole goal behind going out there and living off the land and, living in my tent and hiking around and bringing everything with me. And so just about every painting that you'll see in the exhibition tonight, except for the really, really big ones, started up in the Arctic on location and have traveled with me many, many miles before they arrived here. And that brings me to my very first painting in the Arctic. I am so happy to be able to share with you guys a painting that has never been shared with the public before. When my wife and I and our daughters were out in the Western Arctic on that first journey after traveling for a month across Canada from our home, up the Dempster Highway, flying another hour to Pawlatuck and by boat for an hour, and then 11 hours by four-wheeler, we arrived finally at the edge of Tuktonagai National Park. We traveled there with Jonah, an Inuit fella from the community who assisted us to bring our 500 pounds of gear out there. Well, we arrived and I was all excited. Finally, I'm going to take a canvas out and I'm going to paint the Arctic at last. But a massive storm came through, a storm unlike anything he had seen before, and brought with it a wall of fog that stayed with us for the next few days. And we're in our tents. And it's like, great. It's been a month and a half, whatever. We've been on the road, and I still can't paint anything. So we're in our tent. We had a very large vestibule. And Jonah decided that, well, what do you do when you're in the Arctic in a tent and you can't do anything? You get comfortable and you relax on the land. So he made some coffee. He took a big pot, poured some coffee grinds in it, cooked it up. You know what they say for camping? You're not supposed to start your stove inside the tent. Just different rules in the north. So he had the big Coleman stove going. The light was kind of a little red light shining and the steam coming up. Our daughters started to drink coffee for the first time at that young age. And we were so comforted inside this tent after this big storm, which actually really kind of was scary because it almost blew us off the cliff, that I noticed Jonah was just reclining on the other side of this pot, drinking his cup of coffee, and lying on our sleeping bag on top of our sleeping pad that he now went on to be his afterwards. And as he sat there, I sat on the other side looking at the scene and I said, Jonah, would you mind if I painted you? I try to paint things that move me in life, and this was really moving. My family's all here, we're all having this experience together, and so I set up my easel in the tent, and I started to paint Jonah and his big pot of coffee. And that piece went on to be in a private collection. When they found out that it was coming to Canada, just in the last week and a half, they were kind enough to let Jonah travel with us. So Jonah is on display here for the very first time. And of all the paintings that I ever thought I would do as a landscape painter in the Arctic, it's a portrait. And so there you go. So Jonah's here. And it's a very special occasion to be able to share him on our Canadian premiere. So when this all began, I have to admit, the Arctic for me, and it may be like this for many of you, was really like this big white space in the map up north. It was like a bunch of nothingness, really. Mentally, the idea of the north is white. People tease me, bring lots of white paint, Okay, sure. But what's happened over the last decade is that all of that has completely changed for me. When I think of the north now, I think of the people that I've traveled with. People like Jonah, people like Billy Arnikook in the Eastern Arctic, people like Sam and Jago up the coast of Baffin Island. I think of the other people I've traveled with, like my family, who in the Western Arctic hiked up with me on the tundra when they were young, We had polar grizzly bears walking past us, and we all made it back, and now, a decade later, they're all grown up. I think of the incredible, rich history I've encountered. John Franklin, being at his gravesite, that combines both, because I traveled with an Inuit fellow and his son to visit John Franklin's gravesite. And John Ray, the early Arctic explorer, Adolphus Greely. I think of the wildlife, having wolves surround our tent, 3 of them with just my brother and I, and the polar bears I've encountered. I think of the flora that just sort of shows up on the land for such a short burst of time to bring color to this world that can sometimes be a little more gray. And I also think of how this land is changing. It's so rugged and yet it's so fragile. About how on Ellesmere Island I remember seeing these tracks in the ground from a military vehicle from 50 years ago. 50 years ago, and these tracks were still clear in the ground. How sensitive the environment can be up there. So all of these things have filled my map, if you will, of the Arctic and changed it. And I hope through this that in some way this exhibition can help add to your idea of the North. That it will share some of the awe that I felt while I've traveled up there. That it will connect you with the sense of wonder that I've experienced. A wonder that so often people tend to lose when we grow up. You can reclaim it by stepping out in nature and opening your eyes and leaving these things behind. And lastly, and more important than anything in this day and age, I hope that it will inspire a deeper passion to care for this faraway land, especially now, and its people in this incredible time of change. Thank you so much.
Just before we go in to view the exhibit, on behalf of the Maritime Museum, Yost and I would like to present you with this. You've presented us with so many wonderful framed works. We thought we'd like to give you one. This is a reproduction of the announcement of George Vancouver's voyage of discovery, and we thought it was fitting because this is Vancouver. He was also looking for the Arctic, and it fits in with your many voyages of discovery into the Arctic.
That is wonderful. Thank you so much. For those who visit us in Caledon, you'll find this hanging in a special place in my barn studio. Thank you very much, John.